Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I'm sorry, I'm speaking so loud because the sound system is wireless, so please excuse me. My name is Silvia Hernandez. I'm head of the Office of the Executive Secretary of ECLAC for the division, Economic Division for Latin America and the Caribbean. We a large group of people who confirmed that they were going to be present, but with the time limitations that we have regarding the margin of regarding the high-level event, we reserved this room. So we're going to begin, and we hope that the people who are going to join us will subsequently join us. It's a pleasure for me to know that we have confirmed participation of people from different parliaments of the Latin American and Caribbean. We have a federal somebody from Mexico, a representative of the government, from the academics, and from the United Nations. This important event, which is organized by the CEPAL or by the CLAC, has the important presence of the Executive Secretary, Mr. Don Manuel Salazar, who not only is going to give us a welcome, or he's going to answer us or give us an answer of the objective of this parliamentary network of commissions for the future, the reason why we're here, how much we have progressed, and what are the following actions that we have to take. Also, he's going to expand on rethinking, reimagining how we can advance towards a development model, which is more inclusive and sustainable, and put it into context in terms of what ECLAC considers to be the largest difficulties or stumbling points that Latin America is confronting. But going beyond this diagnosis, we are going to speak to us concretely about the proposals that ECLAC has to transform those difficulties. So subsequently, with this concrete initiative that ECLAC is moving along with, we count on two large allies who are here present with us, so that we can hear the experiences of Chile and Uruguay. And we also have the Chilean Senator Juan Antonio Coloma, who is the president of the Commission for the Future, Science, Technology, and Innovation for the Senate, and ex-president of the Chilean Senate. We also have with us from Uruguay, Mr. Rodrigo Goñi, chair of the Committee of the Future of the House of Representatives of Uruguay. Welcome to you, and we know that you traveled a long and wide to be present this morning. We also are fortunate to have the presence of Daniel Sovato. He's not only an external consultant with ECLAC, but he's a recognized international analyst. And he was also the regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean for the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, IDEA. He's going to speak to us about the results of the conference for future parliaments, which took place in Santiago, Chile. We also have a confirmation that together with us will be the Secretary General from the Executive Office, Mr. Guy Ryder, Undersecretary General for Policy in the Executive Office of the Secretary General. He will talk to us about the Summit of the Future 2024, the expected results, and the relevance for those parliaments in our region. So you know that currently the opening, which is presided over by the president of the Council, Paila Narvaez, is present. She also confirmed that she will join us at the end of this event, but it's important to point out that she has been a co-organizer of this event that we're holding today. We're also very happy to have Mr. Jose Garcia Rumina, President of the Chilean Senate, and he's going to talk to us about the issues that we are here for. So now I'm going to hand it over to the Executive Secretary of the ECLAC so that he can give us the opening remarks. Very well. Thank you very much, Silvia. Welcome to all of you to this event and to the people who are connected virtually. I'm going to forego all of the formal greetings and go straight into the topics at hand and to explain to you what the reasons and the objectives that we're here for today. There's a short story which I'm going to tell you about. In 2011, when there was a meeting, the Asian Development Bank spoke about 2050 realizing the objective was to analyze the tendencies for development and to talk about the strategic the strategies to follow. I can't do this. I can't do this.
And fall in the trap. Latin America is, and I will quote so that you don't hace we have excessive inequality and lack of pragmatism in the debates between the role of the states and the market, in which the ideology predominates. The description is from 13 years ago, and this proves that we're not far from reality. What's most concerning is that the changes as of then are not necessarily to the better. A large number has been to get worse. We still don't grow enough. There is very little productivity growth and too many obstacles for long-term projects. There is too much inequality, and there's a lack of pragmatism. For instance, in the last decade, 14 to 20 years, the average growth in Latin America was 0.8%, and I keep reiterating this, less than 2%, in which the region grew in the decade of the 80s. It's not just that the decade. In the last 30 years, from the 50s to 79, the region only grew 5.30 years. So today that would be a utopia to think of that possibility. The next 30 years, from 1980 to 99, it grew up to 0.7%, and in the last 15, 1.9. In other words, the region has really been losing capacity to grow. This is the first out of 3 development traps that we fall into. The second is the well-known, the trap of the inequality and low social mobility. The third is essential for this event, which is low institutional and governance capacity that would be effective. The lack of capacity for reflection, strategic reflection, and planning, execution, and long-term programs is one of the biggest obstacles to overcome the structural lacks that we see in Latin America and all of the tendencies that we have seen in this complicated world to move forward towards a more productive a more inclusive future. This is why CLAC is convinced that it's not enough to identify these areas, but we need to act. And it's key for us to talk about how to do this. How do we promote this big transformation that are clearly identified in the 17 SDGs?
Sobre esto me voy a referir en mi segunda intervención, pero quisiera anticipar que el tema de los cómo.
So, how leads us to think about the elements such as governance and efficiency or inefficiency of public institutions, institutional capacities of the state, the top capacities, technical, political capacities, because in all these elements on capacity of public policy and the different actors to manage this transformation. Now that we're having this conversation at the UN as to how to increase the pace, now I hear my own voice. I hear my own voice on loudspeakers now. Pardon, I apologize, but the sound in the booth has a lot of interference between everything that's going on, so it's impossible to interpret. On that occasion, we launched a high-level initiative for dialogue and cooperation in order to increase the perspective of governance and prospects and the establishment of a network among parliaments in Latin America. On this, today, we need to talk about it, and we have the privilege of having our colleague Sylvia. As she said, we have two people, Senator Juan Antonio Colombres, the president of the Commission of Challenges of Science Technology, and the president of the Senate. We also have representative
President of the Commission for the Future for Uruguay. The experiences of Chile and Uruguay, the only two countries in the region who have commissions for the future and parliamentary commissions, they understand the role that they play in these commissions in the parliaments. Within the technological and environmental realms, it's important. I am sorry, I am the interpreter and I cannot hear what's going on. I can't interpret this. This is a very important point. We're close to the Summit for the Future, which is going to take place next month in September. Thanking each and every one of you, especially the president of the ECOSOC. And we hope that she will be able to come since she co-organized this event with us. We're expecting her at any time. And also we thank the senator who you're going to understand the role that they have played and are going to continue to play. The leadership and commitment of all of them has been essential to open up paths to fill in these to take advantage of these opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. After setting up the context, that brings us together here. Let me ask the Executive Secretary to provide his intervention. How does the region contextualize and what are the proposals by ECLAC to face these challenges through different transformations for better development of Latin America? Please, you have the floor. Thank you so much, Sylvia. I'll have to try and do this in 10 minutes, but we wanted to take this opportunity to give you a larger context as to how the ECLAC is leading these challenges. First of all, let me talk about the three traps that we've just discussed. I also wanted to talk about these 11 big transformations. To conclude and discuss how do we manage this transformation? The first trap is low capacity to grow. I've also given you the data on not just the growth of the last decade, but the tendency of 30 years, 15 years, which is very serious and consistent, that the tendency is to have a low capacity for growth. Of course, we have to realize that this is just growth for the sake of growth, but rather inclusive and sustainable growth. And of course, there's an important and interesting conversation about what it means to grow. Some growth doesn't mean much. If some country has a lot of money and it grows 6 or 7% per year, but in other sectors of the economy is not growing, then it's concentrated, intensive, no unemployment, then you can use the money to invest in social policies. However, that's an important, interesting conversation on what growth really means. Because the problem with growth of 1 or 2% year after year is that it's very difficult, or rather impossible, to translate poverty into decent work, have the necessary fiscal income to finance social programs and strengthen the state. Everything becomes more difficult. It's not impossible, but it is much more difficult when we have mediocre growth. In order to get out of this trap, it is fundamental for countries to bring to scale their infrastructure and their policies. ECLAX is the toolkit on growth, the orientation of this growth in order to make it more inclusive and sustainable. There is a paradigm on how to and what are productive development policies, and this is what ECLAC is doing, providing. We're not talking about old social policies that increases tariffs or things like that. They're similar, but they're not the same. In other words, we're not talking about the type of industrial policies such as the ones that were used in, for instance, the US, the Inflation Reduction Act and others. This kind of policy may be effective, it may not, it may work, but they have a very high cost, and it's the limited space in which it acts. And Latin America and the Caribbean does not cannot do this. There's other criticism. There is a conversation about it leading to an international subsidy war like Europe or with China, or it could maybe use resources more efficiency, but they're not going to be used so effectively. When we talk about productive development policies that put processes of governance adequate between key actors, productive policy development that are in cooperation between the public and the private sectors, academia, the civil society.
Yeah.
And that limits maybe the production such as human talent and normative infrastructure initiatives that may potentiate the growth. Of course, policies for investment, it's more efficient to have prosperous incentive policies, and many Latin American countries have used this. These cluster initiatives, this cooperation between sectors may create a bottleneck, infrastructure labs, training programs. Then you look for financing for the list that is at the center of this stone in your shoe for the growth of the sector. It's an effective manner of financing. But the second trap is also well known, which is high inequality, low social mobility. The interpreter is doing her best because the sound has interference of her own voice. So she apologizes for the quality. What's not clear is the there are 5 or 6 basic actors. First of all, the low rates of growth in the different sectors of production. This is where we see inequality in the first place, because most countries have a lot of sectors, micro companies or self-employed people or the informal sector, who have a lesser income, and then small and medium companies that have bigger productivity who are able to pay higher salaries. So you're thinking not just of productivity, but also the different sectors and employment and unequal income distribution. Now, regressive tax structures and expenses in social policies that do not compensate the inequality that has taken root. And is compensated because there's clear evidence.
How in these countries, before and after taking into account the state of the tributary structures, progressive structures, and the social policies, the inequality changes radically in Europe. Before and after that, in Latin America, it doesn't change as much. Third, with systems of social protection and pensions without enough protection to avoid poverty. Fourth, educational systems, that's key. A high level of dropouts in secondary school. We have to talk about how much the children learn, those who are out of school, and that doesn't guarantee social mobility. So many countries in Latin America feel that this is critical. And five, inequality of gender, and there's a lot of discrimination towards certain parts of the population. So what is the message here? So there's nothing new up until now, but one message is that if we work on only one of these factors, we're not going to move the needles for inequality. We have to have an integrated approach. In general, the public policies and the governments are integrated to have this kind of approach. The third trap is one of weak institutions and ineffective governance to be able to carry out changes and development, be it education, health, or social protection, any one of those policies. We require institutions who are capable, both technical and operative, so that these institutions can take over this political space and they manage to call on the interest groups and they manage to transform realities. The whole thing that has to do with social dialogue is also key. And the perspective are spaces for social dialogue to be able to think into the future. This is something very strong, and so those spaces, and in the end, that's why we're here. So also have a longer term view. I'm not going to explain them, but these are the 10 branches that we see, always with the risk of having criticisms. One of them is the other criticism is 10. No, if these are the priorities of ICLAC, then more than 3 or 4, then you don't have a priority. But if each one of these things, with which one of these would you remove? So everything is absolutely essential, but we can always add things. So if we continue, this is the basis to talk about the same graph, but in a perspective form. And this is where we talk about the 11 great transformations, the 10 great transformations and the gaps that we saw earlier, plus the transversal transformation to be able to work with the different parts of the government. And this is the topic that we're here for today, perspective. So how are we doing for time? I don't want to go over. So here I'm going to speak about how to carry out transformation. This is a question that in the ECLAC, what we want is to have a discussion. We don't have all the answers. It's a very complicated question. We have to distinguish 3 types of knowledge, and not so much technical, but academic. I'm going to be academic for a couple of minutes. Technical knowledge of systems, which we are referring to the knowledge of socioeconomic, ecological, and technological systems. We've all had to learn about this when scientists talk to us about 1.5 degrees of global warming. There's a lot of technical knowledge, same when when it comes to political and social policies. There's a large there's a large amount of knowledge. So the truth is that we know a lot, we are overdiagnosed. Secondly, there's perspective knowledge and for the objectives, which is the understanding of the desirable future, taking into account the interruptions, the tendencies, or what's to come. This is a type of knowledge which is different. So the third one is also different. It's the knowledge for transformation, which is the knowledge regarding the change processes, where we are and where we want to go in 5 or 10 years. And the third type of knowledge goes beyond the technical knowledge because it's social information. It's not a question of calling a super expert or a Nobel Prize who foresees the future and tells us what to do, because that's not going to work either. What works are the collective construction of those realms. We would be also building a coalition favoring change and favoring transformation. So this puts us into the political realm. So if we analyze the how, this requires knowledge which goes beyond the technical knowledge. It's necessary to understand governance processes, institutions, and to have the social necessary social dialogue. And this would strengthen the capacity for the state to establish a direction and put it into practice.
And we are renewing our efforts for research and thought at the HLPF, such as the future of parliamentary commissions. So very briefly, we'll talk about the top capacities. I'm not going to describe them because I think it's a little bit too technical. However, just to say that if you have this list of 4, but you can add more, then you can see the perspective is essential because you have to think about the future, and it goes back to the political capacities, which sometimes there are translations that say policy, but it's different in English, isn't it? But in Spanish, it's translated as, because the truth is political capacities, the capacity to occupy the political space, organize the conversation, convince the stakeholders, etc. So this is the story of the operations. And then we have the social dialogue spaces. So some of you, I worked at the ITO for 14 years, so I'm very familiar with the tripartite social dialogue, employers, unions and governments. The ILO is over 100 years old, and countries have commissions. When they sign the conventions, when they negotiated, they have bodies. I don't know, higher work councils and minimum wage councils and so on. That's very well institutionalized. However, what's not institutionalized and is not very clear is how do you have social dialogue with macroeconomics for productive developments or for territorial development. There is peace dialogues and other things are there, but these are different. Not all can be and are not tripartite dialogues such as the ones held by the ILO. They're different because ILO dialogues usually are zero sum, in which an employer is negotiating higher salaries or work conditions. They consider whatever they grant is a loss, but the union believes everything they gain is profit. So there's many things that are win-win in that dialogue, but other dialogues are different, aren't they? In other words, there isn't time here, and I'd rather give time for the very interesting interventions that we will hear. Finally, just to conclude, we've presented a vision developed here. This is organizing. This is the organizing principles of this publication, and there's a chapter on each of the 11 points. We've given you the summary of diagnosis, the 3 traps, and this is a summary of Latin America. There is the Decalogue, 10 years, the longer version, and the 11 big transformations. Finally, the big question, how do you manage this transformation? I hope it was very, I hope it's obvious now. Parliaments, of course, have a very important role to play in all transformation, dialogue between the executive and the parliament, so that could produce rather than a government paralysis, because the parliament isn't approving something or the executive wants something different. In order not to get into that, to have commissions for the parliamentary futures that are strengthened, in our view, and this is our hypothesis, it can create a much more favorable political environment so we can accelerate forward to in all those areas Latin America needs us to accelerate. Thank you so much, Executive Secretary. Let me just give you some technical comments. Those who will take the floor could please speak louder and use the mics. We've been told that the microphones are very high now, so this is only helping the interpreters to interpret for you. So could you please just raise your voices and use your mic so that we can hear in the booth? Thank you. Let me now give the floor to those who will discuss how this was possible. The executive secretary was telling us about the big traps. One of them is the low institutional capacity and governance that is not very effective. This is why ECLAC has established a specific project by installing this network of commissions of parliamentary futures, in which experiences that are unique to Latin America in Chile and Uruguay are helping us understand more specifically their value. Let me now give the floor to Senator Juan Antonio Coloma. You have the floor, sir. Good morning. I'll speak as loudly as I can. Let me greet Jose Manuel Salazar and the president of the Congress of my country, and Mr. Garcia, Rodrigo Góñez, a friend from Uruguay, Daniel Sobato, who has inspired us with all of these ideas that are being debated. Let me just go straight to the point. Basically, how do we increase prospective legislative capacities? Of course, by creating new commissions. That is the hypothesis we're working on. In order to do this, we need to understand why this is so necessary, because we can't always see that. At this point, I think the basis is much harder to refute today, because today, in my view, the world is facing the perfect storm, politically speaking. Basically, there is this ecosystem that is governed by internet, that is the global part of our lives, but has two specific characteristics that we need to understand if we really want to create changes that can help us have a better country, better life, and to live together. This internet system produces immediacy and emotionality. Today, if you think about it, everything is instant and everybody reacts. And you see that in your own lives. I'm a father and a grandfather, and I'm sure people here are too. And you realize this isn't a process that goes slower, but it increases. So there is more emotionality and more immediately and instantaneously every time. When we got together in Chile, for those who weren't there, I learned about this survey. It wasn't a political, economical, or social. It was just a survey in which were asked, what do you interpret as long term? So we had a very interesting discussion at the time. I've always said to me, long term is 10 years, but a teacher who was talking to me the other day, and I was talking to Jose Garcia, said 8 generations is long time, but my children say it's 5 years. But the result of this survey was a study, and people feel, and this is more and more focused towards the new generations, feel that long term is 90 days. Somehow, this is what we need to face when you think about it. politically speaking, there is this ecosystem that provokes things to happen instantly and you react emotionally. Political campaigns today are not just projects, big projects, they are emotions, instant emotions. And you see that because of the importance of the way we change.
I believe that not all of these sectors have faced the issue of emotionality in the same way. Let's reflect on what the economy has done. And I think this is a very notable example. What do we speak about when we speak about the economy? We say that the economy was turned into a digital economy. The law of the fintech, everything is technological finance. Why did they do this? Because they assumed that immediacy is something decisive, and this is a way of facing a challenge that exists. They incorporated the artificial intelligence in each one of their decisions. There isn't any large or medium or small company that doesn't they know that they have to use artificial intelligence, otherwise they're going to be left behind. And something else, that the delivery. This is in when in my time, it was something unthinkable. Today, everything has to come to you quickly, come to your home. So you compete. What's faster? When you see publicity on TV, say, well, I want this right away. So the economy has responded. The productive capacity of countries have also been adapting to this idea. And they have different types of energy, different types of processes, because they know that this needs to be something immediate, and we know it's also something emotional. So politics in this regard is very far behind. We're not assuming the challenges or taking on the challenges of modernity with the mechanisms of modernity. So in all likelihood, and we're going to finish with this, we have to make an effort to remodel the reality with other topics that have been left to the side, which are rationality and a deep sense of things that can be done in the world. So I think the thing about the future commissions, the commissions for the future, that's what's important about them. They allow you to step outside of the box, step outside of emotionality and immediacy, but with a different tool. It's not a tool. It means going as far as you can into the future and start at that point to be able to have the ability to generate policies or perspectives which are attractive to change. For example, we believe we have we're looking 11 years into the future, and what are we doing? We're trying to establish issues or topics that are something that we can be passionate about. At that time, it was artificial intelligence, which is now something, or the illnesses or sicknesses of the future, not that it's not be contingent, not compete with immediacy and emotionality. It's going beyond that, being several steps ahead. So looking at the illnesses in the future, but not in the future into a week, but 20 years, 10 years, 30 years. We spoke at one of these summits about immortality, if it was possible or not possible. So this is the only thing that can make you think further into the future. So within a summit, we need to generate a special commission which takes on the topics of contingency. There's a problem there. We have to go beyond that with issues or topics who are interesting, like, for example, artificial intelligence, climate change, and now we're talking about aging. These are topics that are different, and starting there, we can start to think and set policies. How can we do this? For example, once a year, we have a large summit where we invite 80 or 90 or 100 scientists from around the world so that they can come and talk to us about the future, way beyond the future, and so that they can shake our conscience. So we understood that in our species, we have the capacity of thinking in big when we talk about things into the way into the future, which doesn't happen when you talk about what you're going to do next week. That's when arguments come about, fights, and conflicts. But if you go way into the future, you find yourself in a world of reflection, which makes you think differently. So has two great benefits. It changes the political climate. The climate stops, is no longer polarized, no longer tense, because we give a singular space where you're able to live with somebody who thinks differently, because the problems into the future are not the same as the ones in the present. And they're not so much ideological, but they're different. It allows us to land or to talk about important legislative topics. For example, we have a law of neuro rights, and starting to work on the second stage, a law for artificial intelligence. We have the law for legislative perspectives. We want to include it in our governments so that the governments also have legislative perspective. So I wanted to contextualize this because otherwise the situation that we're in is very difficult to make it something passionate. Well, facing the immediacy and emotionality, we have to have a political answer, which doesn't mean that we have to change the ecosystem, but we have to think way beyond and not expecting to have 42 conclusions, but different ways of understanding each other politically, and also to see in a perspective way the legislative issues that are going to affect us from the in terms of being able to live together. So this should be translated into concrete actions. In Uruguay, we have a vision. It's not the same as, but it's the same. We all have the same objective. And I think what Finland did initially and several countries, it points in that direction. So this is what we are able to offer. This is not something that is going to solve the politics of the present, but to create a political climate. I can say so because what hurts countries the most is the permanent tension, polarization, the inability or the bad press that means to come to an agreement, because anybody who agrees with their neighbor, even if they're politically different, it's something difficult to achieve. It's not like as it was a few years ago. This is the way the world works now. That's why we have to look into the future, go way into the future, and from the future, establish the climates and the answers that could be good answers for the present. And this is the spirit with which we are facing this task. And we are hoping, we're hoping that this can be proposed at the level of Latin America, because for example, if you discuss with parliamentarians from other places, you learn, you listen, and you also establish a much better political climate. So within the time that's been given to me, I wanted to make proposals and invite you all to follow this idea, which of course can be improved. And every country has their own reality, their own contingencies, their own anguishes and despairs. But they also have their hopes and dreams. They have their wishes. So this is something that I wanted to offer to you all, and with the help of ICLAC, establish this line of work. So of course, we're learning as we go, and we dove into the pool, and if we can make a better world, well, we'd be very happy to cooperate with everybody. Thank you, Senator Coloma. Now I would hand it over to Mr. Rodrigo Goña, who will talk to us about the experience in Uruguay. Juan Antonio, you have really become very knowledgeable. And the first thing that we learned, and that I can surmise from Juan Antonio, is that there's a perfect storm which started to impact all of us at every level. I think that in all of the radars, we have the perfect storm, but we can become aware of it or we can ignore it. We come from parliaments in the Americas. We've come from the Americas 48 hours ago. We come from parliamentarians just a few days ago. So what is the conclusion? We can visualize this perfect storm, but I'm not going to speak of the risks and threats because they're very clear to us, or the old traps that Jose Manuel was talking about. There are new ones. There are also many new ones that appear, which are disruptive and much more dangerous. If we don't start from there, we're on the Titanic dancing and drinking champagne. So what conclusion? What is the conclusion? And you're not going to let me lie and tell me that I'm a liar. The conclusion of the two Latin American parliaments in the last few days is that storm it scares us, and it's okay that a legislator says that he prefers to be aware than be unaware. This talks about representation, but the conclusion is that we're not prepared. We're not prepared. We're not responsible or honest because we're not prepared for the disruptions that are to come. Nobody in the Parlatino, we were trying to see how we could regulate artificial intelligence, which we all know is a very complex task, but at the very least, we have to try. Because thinking that it's a phenomenon that is going to have an impact on us, going to affect democracy, human rights, everything that we speak about. But artificial intelligence has to follow its own path, and it can be used in any way, whether it destroys democracy or human rights, or where it puts into risk humanity at risk. So, facing this, and that's where I want to start from. We're not prepared, and the parliaments have to become involved. Otherwise, those of us who want to continue to face and live in a democratic world, the parliaments have to take action today more than ever. Jose Manuel was saying at the very beginning that it's very hard for us to overcome the traps and achieve the SDGs. With these challenges, it's even harder. If we were not prepared in the past, the SDG 16 is my point. We're even less prepared currently. And this is what, according to Juan Antonio, this is the key for the commissions for the future. Why? Because, of course, they're not magical, but they have the tools, the potential to try to approach these new challenges. Juan Antonio was enumerating 4 or 5, which may seem very abstract, but they're basic. Dialogue, why? The search of consensus, why in this polarized world can we say, without being romantic, that the commissions for the future can truly develop dialogue? Because when you see the perfect storm that you have in front of you, you're not going to let me lie. From the extreme right and from the extreme left, The conclusions and the paths were the same.
Because really, as we say in Latin America, is a famous poet, Martín Fierro, there is no better fear. There's nothing better than fright to wake the dormant mama. In other words, the conditions for the future, firstly, as a condition and as a budget, are parliamentarians from all ideologies, extreme left, extreme right, that they should be willing to face the perfect storm and tackle it. And that's a lot. And that's why Chile, Uruguay, and Finlandia parliamentarians are able to get consensus. They get consensus. That's an experience that we've had to tackle challenges that are huge, huge, of enormous magnitude. And it's impossible to think about tackling these alone, not just including different ideologies, but rather also different knowledge. And that's what Commissions for the Future would do. Point two, to bring to the same space, to bring together in the same space the different knowledges in today's world, specifically science and technology. And if anybody can think about tackling these three disruptions or these challenges, artificial intelligence and new technology, climate change, and long aging societies, just to mention three, without involving and having equal participation by technology developers and the main scientists. That's a condition that we're required. That's the second element that the Commissions for the Future contribute. Third, and this is something that the 300 parliamentarians in the second summit asked to include in the Summit of the Future. They asked for participation because the experience that they had with dialogue in a polarized world and looking for consensus that were not achieved, or integration of science, technology, and politicians. And thirdly, there is this methodology that is working, which is participatory governance. It was difficult for me, I must acknowledge, when the first time brought it to me, I thought to myself, oh, yes, another theory. However, it works. It worked in Chile, it worked in Uruguay, in Finland, it's working for longer. So, and see results. For instance, all the work for the future, a world that is very scary. And we know fear can paralyze you if you don't face it. And I also like to warn everyone about the fear that paralyzes you, especially society that begins to see that their representatives and governments are not acting, and they start to see the tsunami come up and impact them in their own families, and not just see it in numbers or macroeconomics, but sees the impact in their own family or children because they don't know what they're going to study or what to do with their lives. This is what the Commissions for the Future do. So let me invite you to conclude to look at the reports that they've produced, not just a written report that Commissions for the Future of Chile and Uruguay have written, but also the processes that took them there, the left, the right, that signed not just the document and the report, but also the commitment to action by the whole country to tackle these huge challenges where what's at stake is essential. These are not threats to irrelevant things. These are not threats that only relate to the future. These parents that don't know what their children will do to get work, separate from the fact that they themselves are losing work. So, yes, Jose Manuel, I'm almost done. The Commissions for the Future has created spaces, an environment of parliamentaries that represent people who specialize and are willing to all the way to the extreme right and the extreme left, find a path to at least discuss, if we cannot resolve them, challenges that are putting humanity at risk, if you want to be less dramatic, essential human rights, and then democracy as we know it. Therefore, we're very thankful to Jose Manuel and ECLAC. Chile and Uruguay has gone through their processes. This is Media International also really helped. We believe, and it's been proven in the World Summit and the Pan-American and Latin parliaments, that the parliamentarians can look at how to face these challenges. It's not just to move away from this moment, but also to have the competency and capacities that will take some time and help in order to practice them, which, when practiced, when developed, as Chile and Uruguay have done in Latin America and has done Finland in Europe, then the results can be seen. And I think more than for the future, this is an urgent matter for the present, because towards an utopical future, because we're able to turn this future into a possibility for development and to meet the SDGs and all of our goals. Thank you so much. Let me now give the floor to Mr. Guy Ryder, General Secretary, Under Secretary for Policy in the Executive Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations, who will give his intervention in a minute. Let me also tell you that the CLAG's web stream is having 528 people that are listening and 65 who are listening through the Zoom we've opened for this event. So that we have 600 people listening to us this morning. What now became a project took place because we started this first parliamentarian network of commissions for the future in Santiago de Chile last 20th and 21st of June. So let me now give the floor to Mr. Daniel Sobato, who will be able to somehow summarize the experience and the next steps to take. Daniel, you have the floor. Thank you so much, Silvia. I'd like to first thank you for this invitation. I'd like to acknowledge the members at this panel and those who are listening. And I'd like to acknowledge those who are with us here virtually, because it's important to have participation from people from different countries. My presentation is a summarized version because we don't have time. I must be selective in what I choose to discuss with you. What were the main features and achievements at the conference organized by CLAC with the support of the Commission for the Future of the Chilean Senate and the support of the Deputy Chamber of Uruguay, the Chamber of Deputies, I'm sorry, of Uruguay, under the leadership of Jose Manuel Zinidad, Senator Juan Antonio Coloma, and Representative Rodrigo Goñe, that was in the headquarters of ECLAC last June 20th and 21st. First of all, there were two congresses from two countries that worked on a strategic alliance along with ECLAC in order to promote this kind of initiative by creating this Latin American network. This is one of the things that I think is worth promoting. Everybody from their own expertise, but that's what's virtuous. The conference launched and started this network of commissions for parliamentary commissions for the future from Latin America and the Caribbean. This is something created, but there had been initiatives, but there was no network yet. Participants in this meeting asked ECLAC to become the technical secretariat. And that's important because there are many initiatives that don't really have an institutional host. The CLAC had been asked to provide that work as the technical secretariat, and I believe that's important to point out so that we can give continuity and sustainability to this network. As we said earlier, maybe we should quickly have a second meeting so we can take the pulse of what's going on globally. That what kind of and that's a fantastic opportunity for the region. Geopolitics, the return of geopolitics and restructuring of globalization provide good opportunities. Showing Mexico after 20 years, Mexico is the country that exports more to the US, more than China and Canada. However, that provides opportunities as well as risks. Costa Rica and Panama just created a partnership to produce semiconductors, as a matter of fact, among other things, to take advantage of this opportunity. But there are risks involved, and it's important to provide a context. And the debate of the conference in 2021, its beginning was to take the pulse of what was going on at the global level. What the Secretary General said, we're now in the era of chaos. That's a strong words coming from the General Secretary of the United Nations. All reports are showing that there are 56 open conflicts involving 92 countries of the world. There's an increase in military spending, 6.8% in 2023. So we're experiencing very difficult and tense situations that were well tackled, but always from the view of what that can offer the region. Let me mention 5 points just to give you a brief summary, to give you a taste of what this meeting was. It was delicious. First of all, there were 3 main goals for this initiative. First, how do we improve the capacity of anticipatory governance and perspectives in the legislations in countries which already have it? Basically, that is Chile's experience. It's almost 13 years old, and the experience in Uruguay. 2, how do we explore this opportunity and possibility of establishing a system of governance, of anticipatory governance in countries which do not have it yet, which not only include commissions for the future in the necessary parliaments, but also include executives in the presidential systems of Latin America to work through. And this, with Congresses only, is very difficult and limiting. But if we only work with executives in countries in which executives pay no mind to the Congress or control it, is also very limiting. So thirdly, it determined that it is important to strengthen the commissions that are already in existence, open new commissions in countries in which there are none, find in a focus in presidential systems that is more comprehensive, more holistic, with better coordination between the executive and the legislative in presidential systems. This is a path that's been led by Chile. Its experience in Finland, for instance, there is a semi-presidential or semi-parliamentary system. It focuses in the Congress in Parliament, but it has an interface with the Office of the Prime Minister. And Singapore's, for instance, it is focused in the executive. In view of what the participants said here, that in Latin America, it would be important to have an a coordination between the executive and the Congress, and include other relevant actors such as academia, civil society, businessmen, and other actors that may provide added value. 2, the background of the initiative. First, the World Congress of Commissions of the Future in Helsinki, Finland in 21-22, the second World Summit of Congressmen of the Future led by Representative Boni in Uruguay, and also the experience that Chile has had, especially in Congress and the Senate, and particularly in the Congress of the Future of Chile. I think that's important to mention, and I hope that we can replicate this in other countries. On the other hand, we saw international experiences, for example, Finland, Singapore, and the European Union with an SPAS in the Action Plan for Perspective, Strategic Perspective. Who participated during the first regional conference? 30 people. The format was hybrid, in person and virtual. There were parliamentarians and experts from different countries and regions of the world. From Latin America, we had representation from Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Chile, Mexico, Paraguay, the Dominican Republic, Uruguay, and approximately 75 or 80% of the area was represented. 80% of the people were represented, and high directives and experts such as the office of the Prime Minister of Singapore, the Parliament of Finland, the Parliament of Europe, the organizations such as UNCTAD, the Convention of the United Nations, and the fight against desertifications, the Global Center for the Future of the UN Program for Development, the UNDP, the Organization for Cooperation and Development, OECD, and recognized academia such as the Paris School of International Affairs, Sciences Po, the University of the Basque Country, and the European Institute in Flores, the chair of the Democracy and AI of Daniel Internetes, and Turku, Finland. It was very enriching, and they all provided interventions on their experience. What did we reach consensus on? The acknowledgement of a changing world. This is something that we all see. We're experiencing a lot of change, but like Tom Friedman has said, the change in the speed of change. Third, the disruptive character of this change. Fourth, the threats, existential threats because of climate change and AI. We also focused on changes in democratic trends, aging of aging. This is something that perhaps had the most impact in Latin America. In 2100, 40% of Latin Americans will be over 60 years old. We need to identify strategic processes for decision making that will allow us to take advantage of opportunities and decrease the risks. At this point, to the importance of the capacity to anticipate risk in order to mitigate them, and the role of the parliaments as the ideal environment for the reasons we've explained here. What were the main recommendations? Basically, there were four recommendations in 4 areas. First, relating to the first goal of the conference.
How do we strengthen the existing commissions for the future? We spoke about training, adequate resources, improving the work conditions, interparliamentary communication, and creating scientists and academics, and how to share good practices. So this has to do with horizontal cooperation. Second, creation of future commissions for the future with technical assistance and institutional support, reducing the learning curve, spreading of good practices and regional cooperation. The objective here is how can we work to go from one initiative, which today has exists in some countries, to become something for the whole continent. So how do we manage the integration of foresight and anticipatory governance in presidential systems, working in a coordinated manner between the legislature and the executive? And that's what Chile is trying to do. I think their experience could be very valuable for other countries. And fourth, the organization of regional conferences and having training programs for anticipatory governance, choosing topics which are challenges intergenerationally. So if we're talking about pensions, for example, for the topic of aging, how can we have this topic keep it as a challenge? Same thing with environmental crisis. And the fifth point is for the final considerations, I want to highlight the following. First of all, we're not in front of an idea or proposal. Thanks to the work of ECLAC, the Congress for the Future in Uruguay and Chile, in a very short time, the initiative in the and the network for Latin America and the Caribbean has become a reality. This is something that is operational. It's working. Secondly, the initiative and the RED represent a singular opportunity aimed at strengthening the capacity of parliaments, but also of the executives in the region to foresee the challenges in the future. Third, ECLAC in their condition as a technical secretariat with Chile and Uruguay, and with the support of other parliaments and executives in the region, we will put into practice a working plan for 18 months from second semester of 2024 and all of 2025 in order to implement the recommendations that I already mentioned in the 4 previous points, and also serving as a consultant in the region. The technical secretariat at the moment is designing a plan for the activities which they will share with their strategic partners to initiate this second stage immediately. And as a reflection, I think that with this initiative and the regional network, ECLAC, with the support of strategic alliances, is looking to generate and strengthen governance, social dialogue, which I think is absolutely essential at this point in the fragmented world that we live in, and also to strengthen the technical, operative, political, and prospective capacities, and also thinking about anticipatory governance to go towards an inclusive future, and also to help to guarantee the successful implementation of Agenda 2030 in the region. Thank you very much, Daniel. Very excellent synthesis of what is going to come for the parliamentary network. Without more to do, I now give the word to Mr. Guy Ryder. He's the Undersecretary General for Policy, who is with us this morning to establish the link between the Summit for the Future and what the parliaments can expect from that. I'm going to speak in English. But excuse me, I need to prepare the technology. I would like to greet all of the friends from the region and to all of those who are participating virtually, and especially to the my Colombian friends. I understand what it means to lose your final. It's very painful, but you have to think about the next opportunity. We're going to win in the future. So this is a very dangerous topic. Como se ha dicho, estamos apenas a 2 meses de la cumbre del futuro, que se celebrará durante la semana de alto nivel de la Asamblea General en septiembre. Y quisiera decir algunas palabras sobre la cumbre al escucharlos a ustedes. Cómo yo veo que la cumbre puede conectarse con los temas por los cuales han venido ustedes a conversar, y cómo podemos establecer las bases para una buena colaboración en el futuro.
In a general way, the origins of the Summit of the Future is a recognition that multilateralism is living through very difficult times at the moment, and many of the reasons for that have been referred to by the previous speakers. If you look at the geopolitics, I think we are not only living through times of extraordinary and accelerating change, but we're also seeing a long-term move from the era of the Cold War to a monopolar political situations, bipolarity now to a very complicated situation of multipolarity in the multilateral space, which in any conditions would be very difficult to manage. Secretary General proposed a summit of the future with the expressed intention of making multilateralism more effective, more inclusive, and more networked, joining up better together. And he has presented a series of proposals to the Summit of the Future about how this might be done. To cut a long story to its essentials, we will adopt in 2 months' time a pact for the future. We have to get a consensus of 193 member states to adopt this pact. That's poca cosa, huh? 193 member state consensus, but a decision has already been taken on the structure of this pact for the future. 5 chapters. The first chapter is about sustainable development and financing sustainable development. And this is about the unfinished business of the 2030 agenda. The 2030 agenda for sustainable development, which halfway along the journey from 2015, when it was adopted, to 2030, has a very negative scorecard. We are only on target for 71% of the targets. We need to do better. So you will understand that the first chapter is about the 2030 agenda. It's about sustainable development. The second chapter, and it really does not need explanation, is about international peace and security. We are in a world which is riven by violent conflicts. All of us, I don't know what resonates most strongly in the region of the Americas, but with Ukraine, with the Middle East, with multiple conflicts in Africa, we know the challenges that we have. In my most recent visit to Latin America, a country with a continent without wars, but with security issues before it, figuring very strongly in political life. In Chile, this was the case. These are issues we need to deal with. And here is the problem. The traditional toolbox of the United Nations to prevent and to end conflicts do not seem to be effective today. We need to reflect on that and adopt a new agenda for peace. The third chapter of the Pact for the Future is on science, technology, innovation, and digital cooperation. In a sentence, how do we make extraordinary technological advance promote the interests of everybody, not just a few, but how do we use technologies to promote development for all, to increase the living conditions of all, whilst also addressing the downside risks and artificial intelligence, as you would imagine, and the governance of artificial intelligence has become a very hot issue in that chapter. The fourth chapter, and I'm going to return to it in detail because it's what is most interesting, I think, for you, is a chapter on youth and future generations. I have to confess, I find this a slightly uncomfortable amalgam. Youth and future generations may be related, but they're not the same thing. There are issues about the 1.9 billion young people in the world today that we need to address. Employment, education, social protection. But there are other issues which concern the 9 billion people, not yet born, but who will be born before the end of this century. And these are related, but they're not the same thing. I'll come back to future generations in a moment. And the last chapter will be on the transformation of global governance, how to make our governance systems more effective, and how to make them reflect the world of 2024 and beyond. Not, as is sometimes the case today, the world of 1945 when they originated, when the United Nations had 51 member states, 193. So that is the structure of what is at stake in the Pact for the Future. Now, as I've said, there will be a Pact for the Future, but it will have 2 annexes. An annex on global digital cooperation, global digital compact, but also a declaration on future generations. So let me speak to a declaration on future generations. To my knowledge, this is the first time in the United Nations in the multilateral space that specific attention and a specific intergovernmentally negotiated text will be adopted on future generations. And it is precisely based on the idea that we must, in the decision-making that we undertake today, take into account rights and interests of future generations. And listening to the colleagues from Uruguay, from Chile, it's obvious you are having the same thought process. The declaration on future generations will have some general considerations, set out some principles. I think it is important that on the substance of these issues, we do not limit ourselves, and sometimes this happens in discussion, to the idea that this is about climate action. It is about climate action, but it's about many other areas of decision making as well. I think of inequalities. We have failed dramatically to control and reduce inequalities. We know that inequalities are transmitted generation to generation to generation. What we do today to reduce inequalities will have extraordinarily important implications for the future generations. I could say the same about peace and security. I could say the same about technology. These are all issues of substance that we need to address. But perhaps I should point to the three key factors that we hope to get from this declaration on future generations. Number one, we will have a declaration, an intergovernmental declaration, which will be an expression of intent by the global community around future generations and preparing the future in methodologically entirely new ways. This is important. This debate is a political methodology debate. Secondly, it is foreseen, the negotiations are continuing, that some type of intergovernmental forum would be established in the United Nations to allow for regular discussion, bringing together people like yourselves of future generations in the work of the United Nations. The precise nature of that intergovernmental forum is still under negotiations, but I think its importance in the rather complicated institutionality of the United Nations is that there will be a fixed and predictable time and place when the work being done in our member states and in different parts of the United Nations can come together for further discussion. It's a very important starting point. And thirdly, this is still, I don't want to say controversial, but it's certainly not the source of a consensus. There is the proposal to establish a special envoy, a special envoy for future generations, who would have a role of convocation and advocacy and coordination in respect of future generations. This is what you can expect to see being discussed and hopefully adopted in the Summit of the Future. Now, I have to say, I joined the United Nations 18 months ago, when the Summit of the Future was in its embryonic moments. I did not expect the issue of future generations to acquire the interest and the priority which I see that it has acquired over the last 18 months. I don't know if others will agree. There is, I think, a greater depth of experience at the national, sometimes a subnational level, on future generations. In our preparatory work for the summit, we've been able to draw upon legal text, legislative arrangements, mechanisms, institutions in over 50 member states around the world. Our member states are working on future generations in a way which I think the United Nations can bring together, synthesize, learn from, and share amongst our member states. So I think we have an extraordinary momentum here. At the same time, the United Nations is very conscious that it needs to strengthen its own capacities when it comes to the future. The Secretary General has set in motion what he calls a process of UN 2.0. And this is the United Nations building its own capacities in respect of digital, data, of innovation, behavioral science, most importantly, of strategic foresight. We are learning and we are propagating the mechanisms of strategic foresight in ways that we have not done in the past and which we must do more in the future. And this is, if you like, the United Nations walking its own talk. We have to become future literate inside the United Nations and work with you, our member states, to reinforce all of this. And underneath all of this, well, I'm not going to speak for much longer, is a notion of partnerships. It is one of the strong priorities of our Secretary General to reinforce different types of partnerships between the United Nations and different constituents. Of course, we are an intergovernmental organization. Of course, the decisions on the Pact for the Future will be for our member states to determine and decide upon. But we are working more closely, not only with civil society. We had a civil society conference in May in Kenya, which brought together 2,000 representatives, 40% of them young people, to talk about the Summit of the Future. In the Pact for the Future, still under negotiation, there is language to reinforce our cooperation with parliamentarians, with academia, with civil society, of course, also with local and regional governments and others. And this is not a question of just being more open. It's a question of institutionalizing our cooperation to make it more systemic, more permanent, and I believe more fruitful. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are the ideas that we are trying to progress at the Summit of the Future. From listening to you for a short period today, I think they resonate very strongly with the work that's been done. And well, congratulations for CEPAL's role in all of this. And I hope not only at Summit of the Future, but in the weeks and months after the Summit of the Future, we'll be able to return to this dialogue, make sure that we pick up the seeds that are sown at the Summit of the Future and making it into something which I think will be the most important area of cooperation. So thank you for being here. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Fantástico, muchísimas gracias. Y antes de darle la palabra al presidente del Senado de Chile, quiero darle la bienvenida a quien habíamos presentado antes, pero desde luego...
Thank you so much. And before giving the floor to the representative of Chile, let me give the floor to Ambassador Paula Narváez, the chair of the ECOSOC of the UN, who is the permanent representative of Chile to the United Nations. Ambassador, thank you so much for your participation. And just for 5 minutes, could you give us your comments? The interpretation will only be provided until 12:45.
Sí.
Muy buenos días, miembros de la mesa y embajadora de Chile en Naciones Unidas. Muy breve.
Good morning. I'll be very brief. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit about the experience that the Congress of the Future has been in Chile. Separate from the Commission for the Future, for future challenges, like Senator Moroma has said, we once a year have what we call the Congress of the Future. There is scientists and specialists from the whole world that participate and engaging more and more actively civil society, particularly universities, academics, researchers. What at first happened in Santiago de Chile, the capital, is now happening in different regions. Juan Antonio was just saying that for the first time, we'll take the Congress of the Future to Bolivia. All the efforts are very interesting. I'm not certain whether Uruguay is also doing this type of activities, but national mobilization that these have is great. We have a huge participation and it allows something that for politicians like us is something to do, which is to have youth participation. Young people join us, they get all excited, or university students, even students from high school. And this effort is something that mobilizes the whole country around knowing what's out there in the future. What possibilities does the future hold? I've also listened to the different interventions, and I think that in Latin America, the future is somber. Jose Manuel said it. The growth of the Latin America economy in the last few years was 0.8%. If I bring it over to per capita, we are experiencing negative growth. It's the most likely because most likely population will grow up with 0.8%, and you can feel that when people believe their future, they feel their future is really not optimistic. When people feel that we are not solving their health and education, social welfare and work provision programs. People feel frustrated constantly. The deficits in the budget are real, and therefore we're indebting ourselves more and more with high interest rates. The accumulated debt is causing, so we must have the strength and the knowledge and the will to change this. Possibility to change what's overwhelming us today. Otherwise, we run the risk of having our fellow countrymen believe in politics each day, which is already happening, and so that people feel very uprooted in terms of the future of our countries. I believe our challenge is huge, and we must think about the future, what's possible, and how things will happen in the next 50 or 100 years. Obviously, that's what should concern us.
Muchísimas gracias, senador, y le doy la
Thank you
palabra
so
aquí
much,
a
Mr. Senator. Let me give the floor to the organizer of this very fruitful event, Ambassador Narvaez, so she could conclude. Thank you so much, Sylvia. And, I am pleased that I am so pleased we cooperate with our good friends in Zabal. We are Secretary of the CLAC, Mr. Ryder, Deputy Secretary General of the Policies of the Executive Office of the Secretary General, His Excellency Jose Garcia Rumino, the President of Chile Senate, Antonio Coloma, the President of the Commission of the Challenges of the Future Science, Technology and Innovation of the Chilean Senate, Mr. Rodrigo Goñi, the President of the Future Commission of the Chamber of Representatives of the Congress of Uruguay. I see Daniel Sobato. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, Daniel. And I'd like to also welcome Sylvia as the head of Chief of Cabinet of the Executive Secretary of the CEPAL. I see the Regional Director of UN Women, Maria Noel Gales, and I'd like to welcome the more than 600 people that are joining us virtually here. To conclude this event, I'd like to once again reiterate the importance of the initiative that we discussed here today, the establishing of a network of parliament commissions for the future in Latin America and the Caribbean is not just an innovative idea, but a transformative strategy to move forward towards a future that is sustainable and prosperous for the region. We're pleased that this event is happening after the initiative done already in Santiago a few weeks ago. This gives continuity. The fast change and the different challenges that we face today force us to go beyond the traditional focus on governance and to adopt a perspective on anticipatory governance. While doing so, we can proactively face the complex challenges that we face, making sure that our actions are informed, are strategic, and are aligned with the SDGs. The essence of forecasting is to anticipate and prepare for future scenarios that are possible or not so possible. We have to take advantage of data, trends, and the experts' ideas, as well as of people's ideas to identify possible challenges, opportunities, and anticipatory governance must translate the knowledge in policies and strategies that are actionable together. The concepts give us the tool to proactively face these emerging problems, mitigate risk, and take advantage of opportunities for sustainable development. Dear colleagues, the parliamentary commissions for the futures play a key role in this aspect. We can support parliaments in its main legislative actions. They can supervise budget and watch of the government, and in three critical areas in the implementation of SDGs to promote the coordination of short-term action with policies and strategy, long-term policies and strategies towards sustainable development. This has been a key problem for most governments after the COVID-19 pandemic in the current financial context. How do we solve social and economic problems that are urgent while promoting long-term goals? We must be able to do both, especially in a region such as the Latin America and the Caribbean. Two, to better manage conversations and synergy between SDGs. The forecast tools and the possibility of parliaments who use them can support more coherent policies that could take advantage of synergies between sectors to improve the effectiveness of policies, programs, and the efficiency of the use of public resources. Third, to improve legitimacy and credibility of political institutions, anticipating and realizing the different types of risks to promote the involvement of all actors of society. This is key to strengthen trust among parliaments and their people they represent. Significant participation of people in deciding on their future different ways, as the writer was saying. This is a requirement to face the increased polarization that societies are experiencing and strengthen democracy. This is with people, not without people. The commissions of the futures to be dedicated bodies in our legislative systems that are committed to explore and systemically prepare to the future challenges by giving the legislators a wide understanding of the possible scenarios we may face, and they can find strategies and inform policies that are resilient with social consensus. This will also provide critical contributions to parliamentary debates and policy formulation. By institutionalizing forecast and anticipatory governance, we can transform legislative bodies into dynamic entities that are more able to face emerging challenges before they become crises. To establish a network of commissions for the future would promote the exchange of knowledge between different parliaments in Latin America and the Caribbean, allowing them to learn from each other, share better practices, and coordinate their efforts face transnational challenges. This network will be used as a platform for cooperation and innovation in the region. Also, it is an invaluable means to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 agenda because it's committed to proactive and resilient governance that could navigate the complexities of the world within the spirit of the Summit of the Future. It will empower our parliaments to take decisions that are informed, based towards the future, promoting progress towards sustainable development. While forward. Let's take advantage of the opportunities that this initiative presents to make sure that the promise of the 2030 agenda becomes a tangible reality for the peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean. Let me thank you for your dedication, innovation, and the initiative that you're taking, its mission, and the unwavering commitment to this important effort. Thank you so much. The interpretation must end now.
Muchísimas gracias. Sin más preámbulo, le voy a dar un minuto al secretario ejecutivo para que cierre y les agradecería a los panelistas que nos esperen un minuto para después tomarnos una foto de conjunto. Adelante, secretario.
Muy bien, un minuto. Muchísimas gracias a embajadora y presidente del ECOSOC, Pablo Narváez, por haber organizado este evento con nosotros. Muchísimas gracias, senadores José Antonio Coloma, diputado Rodrigo Goñi, al señor presidente del Senado de Chile, José García Rubinot, por su presencia, su participación, a Guy Ryder, por su presencia, su importantísimo insumo. Creo que quedó muy claro de su intervención de que este es un tema importantísimo y que habrá espacios como resultado de la cumbre del futuro y que se alinean bastante, digamos, las estrellas y las fuerzas en ese sentido. Creo que tenemos un amplísimo consenso, yo diría no solo consenso, sino una fuerte convicción de todas las participaciones sobre la importancia estratégica de las comisiones del futuro como parte de este diagnóstico amplio que tenemos de la importancia de mejorar la gobernanza para mejor poder gestionar las transformaciones, las transiciones y las reformas que los países necesitan, no solo a nivel nacional, sino regional y también global. Así que muchas gracias, Lorenzo Basto, por toda tu colaboración. Gracias a todas las personas conectadas y que están presentes aquí y escucharán más de nosotros porque seguiremos trabajando en este proyecto. Muchas gracias.
Excelente.
Sí.